right? So last week we ended with completing the worksheet. So thank you all so much for completing that task. You will have an opportunity to turn that in under this week's lecture. So excited to get those submitted and reviewed. Before we get into the lecture, though, I do want to pause and do a quick icebreaker. Um, as you know, some folks may be happy, some maybe not. But the Dodgers won the World Series again, second year in a row. Any excitement about that? Anybody happy about that? I'm
Yes,
personally
sir.
a Padre fan, but I have been in LA for a while, and I'm not mad at the fact that the Dodgers uh did it again. Congratulations. I see Matthew's happy. Does okay, a couple of folks are celebrating. With that said, let's reflect on an experience of winning. Doesn't necessarily have to be sports related. It can be if you are part of a sports team, play soccer, football, any type of sport, and you want a championship and you want to reflect on that, feel free to do so. But even if it's not necessarily sports related, it's a win like becoming a parent or a win like graduating from high school or, many of you may be coming on college graduations or uh, your acceptance into grad school, whatever it is for you, something that you're reflecting a big win. So for me, I would say most recently, a big win that I'm celebrating still is becoming a homeowner. It felt like a championship win. It feels like, there's a couple of innings in life and you're like, oh, what are you going to accomplish in each inning, right? You go ahead and, go to college and you're like, oh wow, I made it to college and you graduate. You're like, wow, okay, I finished college. Now I have to get a real job, an adult job. And you're like, well, how does this connect? Trying to connect the dots onto your career, make sure you get a good career, make sure that you're getting paid enough money. And then like this idea of buying a home, it never really felt, tangible. That wasn't my experience growing up. So that was a big win for me, becoming a homeowner. But I guess reflecting on that, with each win, there's like a new challenge, right? Or one of the things I'm working on, just, being able to sit in gratitude with the win more, right? Because it seems like after a win, it's short-lived and you're kind of like on to the next goal, right? And so learning how to, sit in gratitude with the win is something that is important, but also the reality of, okay, now that you have this win, there's this like new stage that you have to go into, whether that is like the Dodgers becoming consecutive World Series winners. It's not just good enough to do the one-peat, the two-peat. Now you got to do the three-peat, right? So there's always like upping the ante on what's the next part of the goal. But again, my goal is to sit in the gratitude of the win more, even as I'm pursuing these new levels of greatness or new championships. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it to you, Edson, and then we'll go to Sam and then Carlos. Edson, oh, perfect. Edson popped it in the chat. Thank you for that. Sports related, playing soccer my whole life. That feeling of winning tournaments is one that is unmatched. A sense of relief as the training and the preparation leading up to those events paid off. Yes, right. All of the hard work, the injuries sometimes, um, the tough losses to learn and grow to get to that championship and win or winning a tournament is really big. Thank you for sharing that, Edson. We'll go to Sam and then Carlos.
Yeah, I'd say so. I coach soccer for middle school, and I'm currently 2 for 3 on championships, and we lost last year. So this next season coming up is going to be a tough one to get back onto that streak, but I'd say that, yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Sam. We'll go to you, Carlos.
Um, so for me, I like only pay attention to sports when it's like the endings of like the championships. So I guess like I'm not really much of like a direct fan to any team, but when the Dodgers won, I thought that was kind of cool versus Toronto, considering that, California. So I thought that was like a good little, yeah, I think that was like a cool little feeling of seeing, because I was at home when they won, and so when everyone around my neighborhood was celebrating, it was like fireworks going off. So I thought it was kind of cool to like be able to see them just because a team won.
Indeed, indeed. Thanks for sharing that, Carlos. We'll go to Jeffrey, Alejandra, and then Hannah.
Yeah, I don't really watch sports that much, but yeah, I also thought the when the Dodger won, it was all over social media and my feeds, and I thought it was really cool.
Did anyone go to the parade today?
I'm sorry?
The parade was today. Did anyone go out to the parade? Show of hands. All right. I know it's kind of chaotic out there. Um, yeah, let's go to Alejandra and then Hannah. Feel free to come off the mute, Alejandra, or respond in the chat. Let's go to Hannah.
I would say after every semester, like our final day of studio, feels like a big win. You get to all come together and see all the final work and kind of just celebrate with everything that we've learned throughout the semester. Um, and that's like really rewarding. And I think that's a big win for me all the time when I get to finish off a semester.
Awesome. Yes, it's definitely a championship win when the semester's over, especially in design courses, right? Because you have these big projects, you have to do your seminars, and those can be pretty brutal sometimes. So, definitely a win. Um, let's go to Priscilla, Nicholas, and then Matthew.
I'm a really big Dodgers fan, so when I like watched most of the games on TV, and when they won, it was super like intense and exciting. But for myself, I played badminton, and I'm on the school team, and a few times a year we go to like UCSD and UCLA to compete with all the other Southern California colleges, and we don't have like a really big team. Um, and we play against like elite colleges. So, even if our team doesn't win like the overall matches, I kind of like, I guess, feel the accomplishment of winning my own games and just doing my part.
Thank you for sharing that, Priscilla. Think it's on Nicholas and then Matthew. Nicholas, feel free to respond in the chat or come off mute. Matthew, are you ready?
Yes, sir. I would say my biggest accomplishment would have to be when I bought my first car on my own. Um, I was 20 years old when I got my first job, and then after 2, 3 months of working, I was able to save up just enough to apply for a car loan, and I paid it off. I was supposed to pay it off in 5 years. I paid it off in two. And that was like a really big victory for me.
Yeah, that's major. Your first big credit buy, not only, having the resource of transportation, but also the capacity to start to build that credit line. So that's really great. And that's definitely a big win. Thanks for sharing that with you. Let's see. I know we were waiting on Nicholas. and I want to say Carlos. Um, I'm not sure if you two are ready. Feel free at any point to respond in the chat or come off mute. But we'll go to Monica, David, and Allison. I see Alejandro responded in the chat. I would say my biggest accomplishment was being the first one in my family to apply to college and get into college. Awesome. It's something I enjoy. It was an accomplishment to be able to go to college, definitely. Thanks for sharing. Monica, a big win for me was getting into Cal Poly Pomona. Same thing. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. After attending community college for more years than I care to admit, community college is a great, you know, first step for sure. There's a lot of great resources, a lot of support that comes from the JCs, which is a little different from the UC system, but the main thing is that you did it. You did it. So congratulations, Monica. Rosemary in the chat. If you call on me, I'm sorry. No worries. Thinking ahead. Appreciate this. Boom. Thank you for the heads up. No, Carlos, thank you so much. Appreciate you sharing. Allison, I see you responding in the chat. Thank you. It had to do with marching band back in high school, specifically freshman year. My college almost, my school almost made it to the finals, but we were zero point zero 0.04 points off. Although it wasn't a complete win, it was the best our band had done. And then, wow, I knew that I did my best, so I was satisfied with the amount of effort we put in. Yes, yes. Sometimes a win isn't the championship, but rather it's progress, right? So thank you for sharing that. Chris, I see that you responded in the chat. I think that as I've grown older, I feel like I am winning when I do the small things like having a good day, being able to wake up in the morning, eating a whole food breakfast, lunch and dinner, definitely going to work, school, and then having a good workout is a great feeling and privilege to have. Amen to that, Chris. I really appreciate that because sometimes the wins aren't necessarily what's happening externally or what you can showboat, quote unquote, because I mean, that's not a bad thing, but that is a part of a lot of what we're discussing is like this social relationship we have to championships, this partnership we have with our friends or, teammates to achieve something together versus what you're expressing is the win when you can kind of focus on the things you need to do internally, like having a good day. So kind of being spiritually, physically, and mentally aligned with yourself, eating healthy, having whole food breakfast. Those are big, big wins. And the benefactor is self, which is sometimes we don't think of wins when it's self-related. So I appreciate that framing. Thanks for sharing. Madeline, it was an accomplishment to become the third generation in my family after my older brother and sister. Yes, yes. Thank you so much for sharing. I think we called on a few other people. Allison shared. Sandra, do you want to jump in there? And then we'll go to Asil and then Gary.
Yeah, I can jump in. For me, it's always a win when I achieve the next step in my career. So I started with an apprenticeship, then I did the next degree, and finally now I'm able to study. So it was a long journey, but I'm happy that I'm able to do it now.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Sandra. We'll go to Asil and then Gary.
I think a big win for me was when I was finally able to visit my family back home 3 years ago because I hadn't seen them in over like 10 years. And I had finally saved up and went immediately after high school. So yeah, that was just like amazing. I'm planning on doing it again maybe next year. But yeah.
That's a big one, right? When you move away from family or close friends, it's not easy to like travel all the time. It's very expensive. So like when you're, saving up for that or you take a long time away from family in between semesters and you have that opportunity to visit. Those are big wins. Thanks for sharing this, still. Looks like David responded in the chat. I'd say my biggest win recently was seeing creation come alive of my new succulent garden. I did on the side of my house recently and began and being excited to see the progress over the months. Yes, working with your green thumb and seeing it actually manifest a healthy plants, thriving plants is a big, big, big win. Um, I live in an apartment, and so I have a few plants that did not make it past this past summer. And I have two plants that I was able to revive and keep alive. So it is a thing. So thank you for sharing that, David, and kudos to your win. Um, Garen, do you want to jump in there?
For me, I would say whenever my dad bought a land a couple of years ago and I designed the house, basically like went and took the measurements for the house and everything and designed it, and almost like a year later it was built. So I would say that was like a pretty good win for me in life, just putting my knowledge into use.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things with being a designer. You get to architect an idea and then watch it manifest in the real world. And that's I can never get over that. I can never get over that. So yeah, no, kudos to you, Garen. Congratulations on that win. Let's go to Isabella, Sabrina, and Fabio.
Probably like one of the biggest accomplishments so far in my life would be I entered an art competition that would be against everyone in I think everyone in California, and I won first place, and I got a whole page in the newspaper, and I even got my painting to be shipped out to Washington, D.C., to the White House. Not like the actual White House, but like the like underground like tunnel thing. And my painting was able to be there for like 2 years. It was like at the start of COVID. I was supposed to get flown out to like obviously like go see it and like take a picture with it, but it was the start of COVID, so they had to cancel that, but they still sent me pictures of it in the White House. Not White House, the under tunnel or whatever it was in the White House. But it was probably just like one of my biggest like accomplishments. I got to like meet one of the governors of or not governor, I don't know, one of the political people of California, and it was like a really like like one of my biggest like my proudest moments of my life.
That's super awesome, Isabella. That's really amazing. It's probably one of the federal Congress members for California, potentially that represents California, but in DC potentially. And yes, it was in the White House. Doesn't matter what part, right? I would you don't have to, contextualize it. It was in the White House, okay? And that is history. You're walking history. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, sorry, I got the person's name. It was Representative Grace Napoleon Tano. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yes, awesome. I think we were gonna go to Sabrina. Sabrina wrote in the chat, my biggest accomplishment is probably when I got a scholarship this year after not getting any despite applying to many throughout the past 3 years. Oh my gosh. Keep going, keep going, keep going with the scholarships. Just apply as many times as you can. Don't give up, you know, but it can be demoralizing, just to name it, right? Like the amount of energy and time that you put into a scholarship application, getting your references together, maybe letters from those references, and then you also have to prepare your own response, and then, to not get it. It's a lot of energy, right? that you put into that. It's similar to, as a small business owner, I apply to a lot of grants and RFPs, and they're very strenuous processes that require a lot of paperwork and a lot of detail for your scopes of work and your submissions. And then more times than not, you're denied, right? But it's that one that you are approved for that is the game changer. So think about that. Just don't give up. Keep going for the scholarships, keep going for the RFPs, keep going for the grants. Fabio, thank you so much for responding in the chat. A win in general is something special, but a championship is definitely a match. My experience with that is in high school basketball. Winning the championship my sophomore year was a great experience. Although I wasn't a star player or anything, playing my role in the team had just as much satisfaction. Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, a team win is a team win, and our contributions on that team are critical. And you can't minimize the contribution. That's one of the reasons why I like the traditions of, if you're like, think when basketball teams win the NBA championship, everybody gets a ring, even people that worked at the stadium. Same thing with the Super Bowl, right? So it's like this powerful representation of like it being a team effort and how everyone plays their role. So cool deal. Let's see. We'll have a couple more share outs. Let's go to Elena, Daniel, and then Alexis. Feel free to respond in the chat or come off mute. I know Elena was moving around a bit. So let's go to you, Daniel, if you're ready.
One of the big things that I'm proud of myself for, accomplishment of mine, was being able to not smoke as much weed as I used to, because I used to smoke a lot of weed in high school and going into like community college too. And it's been like maybe over like 4 months that I haven't gone with smoking. Um, and I had been smoking since like I was like 14, and it's been like around like 10 years. So it was a pretty big accomplishment for me, to be honest. Something that I'm like really kind of like proud of myself for doing, and also like happy to see like the positive change that it's had on like my kind of like my just kind of like my day-to-day function and stuff. But yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Daniel. It's a very personal win and probably resonates with a few folks. So thank you so much for sharing that, and glad to hear that it's working out for you, and wish you continued success on that. I see Elena responded in the chat. My biggest achievement was when I won a poetry competition back when I lived in England. It was countrywide, so pretty big. Awesome. Wow, that's amazing. So we are sitting amongst royalty in this class. Just a lot of amazing wins and accomplishments. Alexis, you want to go ahead and bring us on home?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, just to reiterate, so the our icebreaker is just talking about our biggest accomplishment, right? Or a big win for us.
Correct.
Okay. I think for me, just I think when I left high school, I went straight to community college. And it's just because I got rejected from a lot of Cal States and everything. And I think for me, just being able to finally get into a university four-year institution was a big one for me. Just because I remember all my friends got into four-year institutions right off the bat, but a lot of them didn't even finish it. And I'm one of the ones that I feel like it's gonna finish pretty soon. So it's a huge accomplishment for me because I feel like I started from ground zero, I guess, and then just worked my way up and the one remaining. So
Powerful. Thanks for sharing that, Alexis. Let's see. So getting back into the lecture from last week, we were really looking at this conversation around negotiations and how a lot of what we incorporate from like stakeholders or is a type of negotiation. Folks are trying to negotiate their positions into the outcomes related to your projects, right? And so you want to be able to negotiate with values that are aligned with what, some of what we've been learning in the class. And so when you're breaking down this conversation around negotiation, last week we were able to do some skill practice around the best alternative to negotiation agreement versus the worst alternative to negotiation agreement. So you had an opportunity to work through this exercise using a case study. Some of the ways that we find commonalities, right? This idea of getting to a common agenda is we try to find common language, focus areas that, stakeholders can generally agree with. Oftentimes your projects will touch on a concept related to the social determinants of health. It may impact education, access, and quality. It could impact economic stability. It may support social and community context. Oftentimes, it will influence neighborhood and built environment, and it may improve healthcare access or quality, right? So being able to align your project goals to common language around the social determinants of health is critical. It helps, again, cross stakeholder groups facilitate alignment because you're aligning your target issue area to the research data and information that's available from each of your stakeholder groups. And this again allows you to create alignment. Also, you're able to support your authority through policy windows in existing systems. We talked a lot about that using the narrative canvas, framing your research using different local legislative um, initiatives, naming them, right? Being able to communicate their relevance to your project, your scope of project, the scale of your project, if it's in a context of the county. So you were related to a county initiative. If it's within a specific city, then you could relate it to a city's initiatives. And then within the state, there's oftentimes state legislation that, informs or influences your project scope or design. It is important to name those things, right? Because again, it asserts your authority and your position to move forward on whatever action you're taking forward because it's backed by these initiatives, right? At the local, state, and federal level. The other component is your action, your plan, your course of action. Um, in this class, we're really focusing our action around the engagement piece. So at what points of your project design will you have points of engagement with your different stakeholder groups, um, centering the community, the most impacted community members? How are you going to ensure that their engagement is accounted for throughout your design process? At what points will you bring them into the conversation? At what points will you provide feedback to them related to how their insight is influencing your project design or your scope, right? And how will they know that? And then accountability. You really want to leverage the data to inform your narrative canvas, particularly related to the evaluations piece and understanding what you'll be measuring over time, right? Accountability is about being accountable to what you said you were going to do and the intended impact that you plan to have. But you have to measure it over time. And you might find that your intervention is not as effective as you thought it would be. And you may have to introduce modifications, right? But you need to have that measure of impact over time so that you can assess what is or is not working, right? So this right here is the 4 A's for what I would say equity. It's something that I practice is alignment, identification of authority, development of actionable strategic plans or solutions, and then monitoring accountability over time. So in your negotiation, when you're at the table, when you're engaging different stakeholders, you really want to understand, how you're going to approach it. What is it that you're trying to better understand from this stakeholder? Oftentimes, you have to understand how this is impacting your negotiation agreement, right? And so on the left here is a framework to help you think through that, right? So if you take an accommodating conflict management approach, how will that impact your BATNA or your WATNA? If you avoid it, how will that impact your BATNA or WATNA? If you collaborate, how will that impact your BATNA or WATNA, right? And so on and so forth with the other conflict management approaches. But some of the questions that you're asking yourself is, what power are you gaining or losing with your preferred option versus the alternative? So you're trying to figure out even not only what your position versus interests are, you're also trying to account that for the other parties, but you also have to understand that for yourself. So is your preferred option gaining or losing power? Is the alternative option putting you in a position where you're gaining or losing power? Do you trust the people? And like, what does trust look like? Again, you're looking at the types of values the stakeholder group is showing you. Are they inclusive? Do they have representation of multiple people groups as it's reflected of, let's say the community that you're residing in, right? Are people being treated fairly? A big thing around equity is fair share, people care, earth care, right? So are people being treated fairly? You can assess that in how the stakeholder groups are showing up, what types of requests that they're making, right? And then the question of, do you trust the process? Why or why not? Is the process rooted in a common understanding of common language or common impact around social determinants of health principles, right? Is this focusing on any of those 5 categories? Education, economics, health, community and built environment, right? Are they impacting any of those areas? And if so, how is it modeling the theories of change that we learned? Are they, pushing collective impact? Are they leading with narrative, right? Or are they, leveraging more of like traditional reasons why folks have historically had seats at the table, like gender. Is it predominantly male dominated space? Are they focusing more on education attainment, where only people with PhDs and master's degrees are able to participate? Are they centering wealth? People with large incomes, 6 figures or more, are only allowed to participate? Or have they incorporated models for equity where they're reaching out to the margins and making sure traditionally folks that do not participate are at the table? Young folks, old folks, people who identify as LGBTQIA, right? People who are immigrants, right? So like, how are they modeling inclusive principles to ensure that people who are normally not included are part of the conversation, are leaders and collaborators? And this is how you kind of assess these questions around if you're losing power, or do you trust the people? Do you trust the process? Um, a lot of this is really critical because a lot of the work that you'll be working on in the real world will impact the built environment, right? It'll impact the systemic environment around policy. And it'll also impact access to green space and land preservation. Your work will directly impact that, whether it be through your designs, whether it be through your written proposals, whether it be through your collaborative work. You never know where you'll find yourself. But again, we do know that for many of you, these three areas will be impacted. And what does that mean for the individual, right? So we talked about these different outcomes and how they're influenced by people's identity. And that's critical because historically that has been a result of, who gets to have a seat at the table, who gets to be seen, who gets to be heard, who has access and privilege, right? And so when we're talking about the determinants of health and well-being in neighborhoods, oftentimes it can be influenced by age, sex, and hereditary factors. When you were thinking about the built environment and historically, race-based policy has been a big practice in countries like America, where things like redlining, heavily influenced by race, dictated where people can buy homes and ultimately work and go to school, right? And as a result of that, people of color, Black folks and other people of color, oftentimes live in neighborhoods that are disproportionately impacted by issues like air quality, soil quality, access to jobs that are near your home, um, access to green space, right? So all of these different components of global natural environment, built environment activities, local economies, community, and lifestyle are oftentimes influenced by people's identity. And so the reason why this is important to understand is because when you're building these different spaces for public use, you have to be mindful of the disproportionate impact environmental racism has had on people of color and how, the different infrastructure that you're building has to be mindful of that historical harm so that it doesn't repeat it. And so this conversation around implicit bias and identity incentive association is a critical one. Identity incentive association is a concept that I developed that helps me understand not only how, let's say I may be perceived in social spaces, but also like how our society as a whole sees groups of people in social spaces and how that may impact their outcomes, right? And then how we as designers have an opportunity to affirm those experiences or push back on them, right? But understanding those experiences is first and foremost. And so again, when we're talking about identity incentive association, it's a concept that's based off of three components. So identity is based off of three components, which is your condition, your behavior, and the people that you're associated with. All of this uh, influences the social acceptance into this cultural construct. In America, the cultural construct leans towards white male patriarchy, right? And oftentimes people are incentivized to operate with the values represented in white male patriarchy. What that does is it isolates or puts on a pedestal, heteronormative behavior, um, you know, the white male patriarch aesthetic as it relates to this relationship to condition. So your gender, your sex, your mental health, all those are part of your condition. And then it also influences behavior. So there's a certain expected behavior that's related to white male patriarchy, being calm, being assertive, being confident, right? Um, all of these different values that are represented in behavior, being clean cut, being clean shaven, being groomed, wearing fitted clothing, all these appropriate type of behaviors that show up in the values that people are giving incentive for. And that big piece around incentive is critical because if you behave in a certain way, you're incentivized to do it. And you may be wondering, okay, well, where does this show up? Well, who's ever gone to the club and been told, they can't get in because of their what they're wearing? By a show of hands. So some of you may not have had that experience, but some people go to clubs and they're, dismissed because of what they're wearing, or oftentimes because they don't look a certain way. Oftentimes people feel that it's because of their weight, or the fact that, they're being seen as too urban, right? So, for example, you go to the club, you have a hat on, and the person says you can't come in with your hat. But you see two or three people inside the club already with hats on, right? And the only difference is color, more than likely. So those are situations where, again, certain behavior is not appealing or accepted with certain people versus other people, right? Or certain, attitudes and behavior are kind of valued over others. There's certain restaurants that may have a dress code, or require a certain type of behavior in order to have a meal there, right? And so you start to see these different rules pop up to assert an expected behavior and a value that reflects a value that establishment is trying to uphold. And oftentimes it's centered around this socially acceptance, around this cultural construct, again, of white male patriarchy, and so on and so forth. The other thing is association. And this is an interesting one because association sometimes erases the requirements of behavior and condition. So, say, for example, you have a friend, or you're associated with a group that is aligned to the behavior or condition that is socially acceptable, and they're vouching for you. They're, you're friends with them, so they can lend their association and your relationship to them to bring you into this idea of being socially acceptable, right? So again, if you have the right condition, in regards to sex, gender, mental health, things, sexuality, if the right condition is there, then you're incentivized. If you have the right behavior, the way you wear your hair, the types of clothes you wear, your attitude, then you're incentivized. Or if you're associated with the people who have access to those things, you're incentivized. And so again, on the extreme, it could be race-based, right? And we know historically in Western culture, race-based incentives have been a big practice. Race-based policy, especially in the built environment, has been a big practice. But it could be as benign as what type of cell phone company you have, right? Um, by a show of hands, who's team iPhone? So we have a few team iPhones, folks. What about Android? Who's team Android? So we have it's dwindling. It's dwindling. It's not as many team Androids, right? But there you go, right? And sometimes people have stopped being friends with folks, right? Because their text messages don't come up blue, right? So again, there's these extremes that we've seen play out in our cultural constructs within our society, that oftentimes leans towards white male patriarchy, but it can be created within the social constructs we have within our smaller spaces. And it could be around gender, it could be around sexuality, it could be around race, but sometimes it's based off of what type of phone carrier you have, right? So with that being said, I would like for you all to do some skill practice around this concept of identity incentive association and see how it relates to you individually. There is a link, a Padlet link that I will put in the chat. But I want you to walk through some of these questions around your condition. What condition do you have that gives or takes away power? Behavior, what behavior do you exhibit that helps you maintain or that interferes with your power attainment? And then lastly, association, who or what do you associate with that asserts your value or your power? So let's see. I'll take this and put it in the chat. And we'll take a couple of minutes to respond to this, about 10 minutes to respond to this. And then we'll come back and do some share outs. So the link in the chat should take you to the Padlet link, and that should allow you to respond similar to how we did last week. And then I'll read out some of the responses when we come back in 10 minutes. All right. So in 10 minutes, we'll be back. 7 o'clock. All right, so we should be making our way back. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you're back with us. All right. Let's read into some of these responses. All right, condition, health, gender, etc. What condition do I have that gives or takes away power? I think that being a female takes away power because we are often dismissed, and being older than many of my friends gives me power because I can significantly influence their ideas. So again, in a lot of our identities, there's parts of identities that may give us power, whereas some parts of identity may take it away based off the social construct that we find ourselves in at any given moment. The sex I was born with could be seen as a disadvantaged position. Also, certain health conditions place me at a disadvantage sometimes, but the race I'm perceived as puts me in a position of privilege. I see being of mixed ethnicity as a power, in that when you are brought up surrounded by different cultures and ways of living, you tend to learn how to understand people who are different from you much quicker in life and be more accepting too. It's a good one. I think as a male, oftentimes gives power simply because of historical established prejudice and social norms. My privileges are that I am a man, cisgendered, heterosexual, young, in college, and I'm American. My oppressions are that I am brown, Mexican, disabled, low income. So again, those things can be juxtaposed but exist simultaneously. And some things are more apparent, depending on how they show up, right? Like someone's condition may not be as apparent, like their sexuality may not be as apparent as their race, for example, or when you're looking at their condition as race may not be always apparent. Some people are, uh, I would say, white presenting versus white passing, because white passing is more like I'm trying to pass, versus presenting is how people perceive you. So some people are white presenting, but they may be a person of color. Sometimes I am too understanding, empathetic, or nice, when unfortunately others choose the route of being dominant or vindictive. I've seen other people take away power from me many times simply because I took the higher route and stuck to my morals, where others took a lower route through lying, cheating their way out of taking responsibility for their actions, while I took the higher route of doing the opposite. But still, some people will believe lies, and somehow the power of honest, the power of honest is diminished, overpowered. That does happen sometimes. Being a woman has often led me to experience situations where people feel that they can take advantage of me, due to the thinking women are weak. It is very disheartening and very normalized. Women still face greater challenges when it comes to reaching top positions in companies. In landscape architecture, there are many women working in the profession, but only a few lead their own firms. These are really good points to point out. We're living in some very interesting times where, a lot of things that we thought were normal, as it pertains to, women's rights or, just human rights, are being challenged, right? And so it is important to name these realities and how, sometimes our identities are impacted by these social norms so that we can push back on them. And oftentimes, through our roles, we do have power to influence, how people are experiencing these shared spaces based off of their identity. Behavior. Let's go to behavior. I tend not to be a good storyteller. This means that I am very bad at explaining instructions or just discussing something in general because my explanations go everywhere and it is hard to focus on one topic. Uh, I struggle with my speech. I write well, but oftentimes in person, I struggle to speak clearly and concisely. My words get jumbled. I get self-conscious and anxious. When I was younger, This used to be especially present in my life. As the past couple of years, it has significantly improved. That resonates, as a professor, having to be in front of people to speak for long periods of time about very complex things that can be very challenging. And then really, having the capacity to uh, have concise thoughts and frameworks and processes to share with other amazing, great thinkers like yourselves can be very challenging. And, I hope I don't get too jumbled off my words, but it does happen. And this resonates. This definitely resonates because you can get really self-conscious and anxious. I hate being on camera, but you have to do it. And it helps you grow and it builds character. But it is big, right? All of those things definitely resonate. And my biggest fear is that, you all aren't learning anything from what I'm teaching week to week, right? But it is proven by your assignments and what you submit that you all are learning something, so that's good. But that whoever wrote this one took the words out of my mouth. Okay. How I speak often depends on who I am talking to, but I generally try to be as polite and friendly as possible, though I am aware and I lack social skills, which can make me come off as ingenuine or annoying. Um, Definitely resonates, right? This idea of behavior, how people come across, and how that's interpreted. Uh, and if it's not what people expect or what's socially acceptable, then people may try to police you or coach you in a way that could feel like you're being handled, or it's like I'm just having lunch right now. I'm not trying to be coached on how I'm supposed to behave or how I could have done an interaction better. But, again, that's how it shows up. I try to look put together as my thought is to look how serious and put together as I want to be taken. This means putting together a good enough outfit and maintaining decent grooming habits. Yes, right? So this idea of participating in the behavior that will be the most incentivized, right, in these social settings. Oftentimes, we take our social cues from society, what fashion is saying, or, what a professor is wearing, or, what it's been saying, what has been said to be socially acceptable. So this idea of being put together is being informed by something. And the idea of being put together also, there's an expectation that you'll be treated a certain way when you're quote unquote put together. Code switching is another big one to accommodate the situation. A lot of people of color have to code switch. There may be a specific way that you talk when you're with your friends and family, a little more relaxed, with a more twang or pizzazz in your voice. But in professional or public settings, you may modify your speech so that it is more socially acceptable. A lot of times people who speak multiple languages, they, speak English versus speaking other languages in social settings because people get upset when people speak in multiple languages. Just like, why can't I speak in my native tongue in public? And you should be able to, right? But again, sometimes people are um, deciding not to do that so that they're seen as more socially acceptable. Um, I've noticed my posture really affects how people see me. When I stand up straight and keep my shoulders up, I personally feel more confident and people seem to respond to me differently. They listen more. But when I slouch or keep my head down, it gives off the opposite vibe, like I'm unsure of myself. I don't always think about it in the moment, but posture definitely comes off much present or powerful, like in a room, right? So having good posture sets a tone and gives the energy of confidence, right? And it changes the way people treat you. Association, this is one of my favorites because again, it sometimes allows for you to leverage your association versus play the role of condition and behavior. I associate myself with my friends and family as they are the most important things in my life. They give me power to continue to live my best life so I can continue to be by their side for the rest of our lives. My brother works at a boba shop. He can give me free drinks or keep whatever is left in store at the end of the day. Don't let anyone know where that boba shop is because I'm sure people will pull up to try to get some deals. But shout out to your brother for hooking it up with the boba. I associate with my friends, family, classmates, roommates, and professors, though I don't really assert myself, at least not that I'm aware of. I feel like I assert is not the right word for how I would describe it. Okay, cool. Who or what I associate with that asserts my value or power. Okay. Being a Christian is often seen as a negative, and I've received very poor treatment because of it, but it is who I am, and it's precisely the person I intend to always be, and I'm not ashamed of it. I find great value and power in not being scared of this word, but learning to care for others as much as I can always. Yes, yes. Um, it's important to, understand how you identify, and there's a lot of ways where certain associations are loaded, right? No matter like how we personally relate to the association or understand the association, like religion, a lot of times there's a whole loaded understanding of what that association is before you can communicate your relationship to it. And that can be sensationalized by these cultural constructs or what's happening, in the social space, like social media, how people are perceiving religion, how people are leveraging religion, weaponizing religion, and how that may not be your intention or what you're doing, but people are kind of perceiving or portraying your association and the likely likeness of what they're seeing somewhere else, and it's oftentimes not accurate. So I appreciate you sharing that. So the next one is, who or what do you have power over, and what does it allow you to decide? I have power over my friends because I'm the oldest among them. This allows me to decide on a lot of aspects of our hangouts, whether it be an optimal time or a fun place to go for hangouts. I have the house that all my friends tend to use for hangouts. So I have the power to choose the time and day, among other things, when we plan to hang out. Being one of the oldest and most responsible in my friend group, having given me power to come up with conclusions or plans, and even when my friends have trouble with something, they always call me for advice. I have some control over my family's finances as they trust me due to maturity and financial skills. I often debate with my family and friends about businesses and money, and most of the time I can persuade them towards my side of the argument. This allows me to make changes to their lives through financial advising. I have power over myself for the most part, and I also have some influence within my family and my friends. I have power over my emotions, my mind, my thoughts, and my actions. That allows me to do so much or decide to decline a lot too. When I struggle with things in life, I always have to come back to my attitude. That oftentimes where most of the issues come from. When I remember that I have power to be the kind of person I should be, that helps me be realistic about not blaming others for my problems when I'm ultimately the person who can fix them. Amen to that. I have the power to attend college, as many of the community I am a part of historically have been dissuaded to join and finish higher education, and statistically, college is the only way I can escape poverty. Yes, it's definitely a strong pathway, right, for that. And this idea of power over and what does it allow you to decide is a big uh, point of reflection, right? Because it allows you to empower or disempower others to achieve whatever desire they may have, right? And that may be for a good reason or a bad reason. Not everybody's desire should be achieved, right? But with that being said, it becomes this opportunity for you to leverage your power to do it for the greater good. And we've been talking a lot about values, and we're talking about the values that we're holding, dear to us from what we've learned in this class is collective impact, uh, you know, allowing everyone's story to be heard equally. because everyone has a story, right? And you want to hear it. And it may inform which way we should go, but it is not, the only piece of information that's informing which way we should go. So everyone's lived experience is equal, right? So equality, equity in lived experience is big. And so allowing people to share that and then finding what patterns are showing up versus saying, you have the power to decide because you're part of this group. It's like, no, we decided together, and what we shared together allowed us to see that this is what's most important collectively among us from this shared experience, right? This idea of, can your presence impact someone else's power outcomes? I think that my presence has a significant influence on a very specific group of friends because I am quite outspoken and one of the many people who gravitate towards me for decisions about their personal life. Yes, when I share my experiences and advice with someone, I always feel like I make an impact and have been admired for that. It's good. I think it can. I see that many people admire me because of some skills I have, and because of that, they regard me and what I think highly. This is a tricky place to be in sometimes for both sides, really. No one knows everything. And it's okay to not know everything and to share that you don't know. Point someone in the right direction to that information. You don't always have to be the bearer, right, of information, but that also is a good reason why people may want to come to you because they know that even if you don't have the right information, you'll point them in the right direction. So, but yeah, all of this to say, it's important to leverage your position of power to get more people in the room. And sometimes it's not more people like you that need to be in the room, right? So how do you leverage your position to ensure that people who may not look like you or may not have the same lived experiences as you get into the room, right? And that's going to be an important part of the work that you're doing is asking the question, who is missing, right? That was one of the first questions we asked in our lectures is like, who is missing from the conversation? And is who is missing intentional, right? And how do you address that gap? So, did you all like that activity? Thumbs up, hand claps. Did y'all enjoy that activity? Let's see. Awesome. A few people enjoyed it. It is a heavy one, right? And oftentimes people think of privilege from the position of not having. Um, but many times we're on the side of having, right? And other people are missing out. So when we're thinking of identity on the spectrum, it's anonymous, one site, self-asserted, socially validated, verified, right? So this idea of how we assert someone's identity is a social thing. And oftentimes we'll be creating social spaces with our design projects that have to be intentional with how identity is incentivized and how it shows up. Power over, who or what do I have power over, and what does it allow me to decide? Power proximity. Can my presence impact someone else's power outcomes? Power to, what parts of my perceived identity allow me to have access to more than someone else in shared spaces? And does this change in different spaces? These are critical questions that you must ask, especially when you're talking about building something with the intention of equity. So what we're going to do is take about a 5-minute break before we get into the rest of the lecture. We'll come back at 7:25. Please, do your bio breaks, and then we'll get back into the lecture with this video on racism has a cost for everyone. We'll be back at 7:25. All right, we should be making our way back. Thumbs up if you're back with us. Thumbs up if you are back with us. All right. So the next part of the lecture is going to go into this zero sum conversation. We're going to watch this cool video by Heather McGee, who wrote The Sum of Us, I believe it's called. And it's talking about this concept of the zero sum approach that many folks believe happens when we're talking about equitable distribution of resources. So the zero sum approach means that if I win, or if you win, I lose, right? So any type of situation where folks are seeing, particularly in this country, Black people win, it oftentimes means that they do not want to participate in that, even if it is resulting in their own destruction, right? They vote against their own interest because they feel like, although they're not getting what they need, they're preventing Black folks from getting it. It's a very unique conversation, even when we're talking about what's happening now, where the federal government is shut down, and there's this reality that SNAP benefits are going to be disrupted for many folks. In social media, there's been these tropes going out about the welfare queen and Black communities going to, uh, go into the stores and wreak havoc because SNAP benefits aren't available. Where, the fact is that there's a majority of, white people, for example, that are going to be heavily impacted by this disruption, as the majority of people receiving SNAP benefits numbers wise are white, right? And so there's this pushback on the narrative of the welfare queen right now because it's not just impacting Black communities. However, it seems that if it were to just be impacting Black communities, that would be okay, right? However, this is a disproportionate impact right now being experienced in white families, white communities. And so it's not just affecting Black households, it's affecting many American households, especially at this time where a lot of folks have been losing their jobs. So I think it was even noted that almost 300,000 of the federal employees who lost their jobs over the last year were Black women. And so in households headed by Black women, right, where they're the main household earner in those households of 300,000, that's going to disproportionately impact not only Black women, but their families and communities as well. So there's this disconnect as far as like how these situations are impacting people, who's being impacted. And oftentimes this concept of zero sum plays out where people who are disproportionately impacted vote against their own interests because they think they're harming another people group. And that's a big message in regards to what we're dealing with now, because a lot of folks aren't really seeing themselves a part of the collective, but they're seeing themselves as an individual, either as an individual person or their identity group as an individual identity group. So I really, really like this video. I hope you all take notes. We'll have some questions to answer after it is over. It's a really, really great video. Check it out.
I am a public policy wonk. I investigate data that points to problems in the American economy. Problems like rising household debt, declining wages and benefits, shortfalls in public revenue. And I try to pinpoint solutions to make our economy more prosperous for more people. I geek out about tax policy and infrastructure investments, and I get really excited by a gracefully designed regulatory regime. These are the kinds of topics that I was talking about on a public television live call-in show in August of 2016. I was about halfway through the program when a man called in, identified as Gary from North Carolina, and he said, "I'm a white male and I'm prejudiced." He then went on to detail his prejudice, talking about black men and gangs and drugs and crime. But then he said something that I'll never forget. He said, "But I want to change, and I want to know what I can do to become a better American." Now, remember, my career is about economic policy, as translated into dollars and cents, not personal thoughts and feelings. But when I opened my mouth to respond to this man on live television, the most surprising words came out. I said, "Thank you." I thanked him for admitting his prejudice, for wanting to change, and for knowing somehow that that would make him a better American. The exchange between Gary and me went viral. It's been viewed over 8 million times and inspired waves of social media commentary and news coverage. And I think people were surprised that a black woman would show such compassion for a prejudiced white man, and they were surprised that a white man would admit his bias on national television. Not long after Gary and my viral moment, we met in person. He said that he had taken my advice. He said that my words had been like someone wiped the dust from a window and let the light in. Over the years, Gary and I have become friends. And Gary would tell you that I've taught him a lot about systemic racism in America and public policy, but I've learned a lot from Gary too. And the biggest lesson for me has been that Gary's prejudice has caused him to suffer. Fear, anxiety, isolation. And it's made me rethink many of the economic problems I've been focusing on my entire career. I wondered, is it possible that our society's racism has likewise been backfiring on the very same people set up to benefit from privilege? Driven by this question, I've spent the past few years traveling the country, researching and writing a book. My conclusion? Racism leads to bad policymaking. It's making our economy worse. And not just in ways that disadvantage people of color. It turns out it's not a zero sum. Racism is bad for white people too. Take, for example, America's underinvestment in our public goods, the things that we all need that we share in common, our schools and roads and bridges. Our infrastructure gets a D+ from the American Society of Civil Engineers, and we invest less per capita than almost every other advanced nation. But it wasn't always this way. I traveled to Montgomery, Alabama, and there I saw how racism can destroy a public good and the public will to support it. In the 1930s and 40s, the United States went on a nationwide building boom of public amenities funded by tax dollars, which in Montgomery, Alabama included the Oak Park Pool, which was the grandest one for miles. You know, back then, people didn't have air conditioners, and so they spent their hot summer days in a steady rotation of sunning and splashing and then cooling off under a ring of nearby trees. It was the meeting place for the town. Except the Oak Park Pool, though it was funded by all of Montgomery's citizens, was for whites only. When a federal court finally deemed this unconstitutional, the reaction of the town council was swift. Effective January 1st, 1959, they decided they would drain the public pool rather than let black families swim too. This destruction of public goods was replicated across the country in towns not just in the South. Towns closed their public parks, pools, and schools, all in response to desegregation orders, all throughout the 1960s. In Montgomery, they shut down the entire parks department for a decade. They closed the recreation centers. They even sold off the animals in the zoo. Today, you can walk the grounds of Oak Park, as I did, but very few people do. They never rebuilt the pool. Racism has a cost for everyone. I remember having that same thought on September 15th, 2008, when I learned the breaking news that Lehman Brothers was collapsing. Now, Lehman was like the other financial firms that would go under in the coming days, done in by overexposure to a toxic financial instrument based on something that used to be simple and safe, a 30-year fixed-rate home loan. But the mortgages at the center and the root of the financial crisis had strange new terms. And they were developed and aggressively marketed for years in black and brown middle-class communities, like the one that I visited when I met a homeowner named Glenn. Glenn had owned a home on a leafy street in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Cleveland for over a decade. But when I met him, he was near foreclosure. Like nearly all of his neighbors, he'd received a knock on the door from a broker promising to refinance his mortgage. But what the broker didn't tell him was that this was a new kind of mortgage. A mortgage with an inflated interest rate and a balloon payment and a prepayment penalty if he tried to get out of it. Now, the common misperception then and still today is that people like Glenn were buying properties they couldn't afford, that they themselves were risky borrowers. I saw how this stereotype made it harder for policymakers to see the crisis for what it was back when we still had time to stop it. But that's all it was, a stereotype. The majority of subprime mortgages went to people who had good credit, like Glenn. And African Americans and Latinos were 3 times as likely, even if they had good credit, than white people to get sold these toxic loans. The problem wasn't the borrower, the problem was the loan. After the crash, most of the nation's big lenders, from Wells Fargo to Countrywide, would go on to be fined for racial discrimination. But that realization came too late. These loans, super profitable for the lenders, but designed to fail for the borrowers, spread out past the confines of black and brown neighborhoods like Glenn's and into the whiter mortgage market. All of the nation's big Wall Street firms bet on these loans. At its peak, 1 out of every 5 mortgages in the country was in this mold. And the crisis that my colleagues and I saw coming, would go on to cost us all $19 trillion in lost wealth, pensions, home equity, savings. 8 million jobs vanished. A home ownership rate that has never recovered. My years of advocating in vain for homeowners like Glenn left me convinced we would not have had a financial crisis if it weren't for racism. In 2017, I traveled to Mississippi, where a group of auto factory workers was trying to organize into a union. Now, the benefits they were fighting for, higher pay, better healthcare coverage, a real pension, they would have helped everybody at the plant. But in person after person that I talked to, white, black, for the union, against the union. Race kept coming up. A white man named Joey put it this way. He said, white workers think, I ain't voting yes if the blacks are voting yes. If the blacks are for it, I'm against it. A white man named Chip told me, the idea is that if you uplift black people, you're down in white people. It's like the world's got this crab in a barrel mentality. Now, the union vote failed. Wages at the plant are still lower than their unionized peers, and people there still worry about their health care. You know, it's tempting, perhaps, to focus on the prejudiced attitudes of the men and the workers that I heard in Mississippi. But I'm more interested in holding accountable the people who are selling racist ideas for their profit than those who are desperate enough to buy it. My travels also took me to places where I saw, however, that it doesn't have to be this way. I went to Maine, the whitest state in the nation, the oldest, where there are more deaths every year than births, and I went to this dying mill town called Lewiston that is being revitalized by new people, mostly African, mostly Muslim, immigrants and refugees. There I met a woman named Cecile, whose parents had been part of the last wave of new people to come to Lewiston. These are French-Canadian mill workers at the turn of the century. Cecile was retired, but she had found a new purpose in life by organizing Congolese refugees to join with the white retirees at the Franco Heritage Center. These men and women from the Congo were helping these retirees remember the French that they hadn't spoken since their childhoods. And together, these two communities helped each other feel at home. You know, for all the political talk about the newcomers being a drain on the town, a bipartisan think tank found that the local refugee community there created $40 million in tax revenue and $130 million in income. And I talked to the town administrator who was boasting about the fact that Lewiston was building a new school when all the rest of towns like theirs in Maine was closing them. You know, it costs us so much to remain divided. This zero-sum thinking that what's good for one group has to come at the expense of another, it's what's gotten us into this mess. I believe it's time to reject that old paradigm and realize that our fates are linked. An injury to one is an injury to all. You know, we have a choice. Our nation was founded on a belief in a hierarchy of human value. But we are about to be a country with no racial majority. So we can keep pretending like we're not all on the same team. We can keep sabotaging our success and hamstringing our own players. Or we can let the proximity of so much difference reveal our common humanity. And we can finally invest in our greatest asset, our people, all of our people. Thank you.
All right. So she talked about this park, right? This conversation around this park and how the park was drained, this pool. This Oak Park, Montgomery, Alabama pool was drained because it was used by Black folks. And this is back when, the 1964 Civil Rights Bill legislation was passed, and you had, Black folks starting to use more public spaces. Many local municipalities decided to disenfranchise Black folks instead of giving them access, right? And disenfranchisement of Black folks meant disenfranchisement of all people, right? So instead of making it accessible to all people, they ended up putting cement, filling up the pool, making it inaccessible to anyone, right? So this is a real cost that racism has for all of us. This is a prime example. Years later, there's still no pool in that community. Um, what I want to do is give us an opportunity to respond to the questions that are in our module for this week. Let's see, going here, module. So related to the Heather McGee video, question number one is shared environmental resources and equity. McGee discusses how systemic racism impacts public resources that benefit everyone, not just targeted groups. How might this idea apply to community spaces or public landscapes? In what ways can landscape architects ensure that parks, green spaces, and other resources serve diverse communities equitably? Question number two is community investment in landscape design. According to McGee, economic and social progress are hindered when certain communities are systemically excluded. In landscape design, how could investments in historically marginalized communities impact the overall well-being of a city or region? Consider both economic and social benefits in your response. Three, inclusive design and accessibility. McGee emphasized that addressing racism could benefit everyone by creating shared inclusive opportunities. What are some strategies you can implement as future landscape architects to make public spaces more inclusive and accessible? How can these strategies contribute to reducing social inequities? Resilience in landscape architecture, the last one. McGee points out that systemic exclusion affects resilience across communities. How does equitable landscape architecture contribute to communities' resilience in the face of challenges like climate change or economic hardships, like many cities are in right now? Can you think of examples where inclusive landscape design has built stronger, more unified communities? So we'll take about 10 minutes to respond to these questions, and then we'll come back at 8 o'clock. Go ahead and respond to these questions. I'll put them in the chat, but they will also be on the screen. So we should be making our way back. Thumbs up if you're back with us. I gave you all a little extra time on that. Thumbs up if you're back with us. All right. So you should be able to upload a PDF for this assignment. And there might be a couple of, if you put it all in one document, that's cool. But there might be a couple of files that you upload. So like this, save. All right. So what we're gonna do now is have a few folks share out their responses. So who wants to go first? Shared environmental resources and equity. McGee discusses how systemic racism impacts public resources that benefit everyone, not just targeted group. How might this idea apply to community spaces or public landscapes? In what ways can landscape architects ensure that parks, green spaces, and other resources serve diverse communities equitably? Who wants to share their response? Take a volunteer to come off mute or share in the chat. Let's try to get through these pretty quickly. Sabrina, thank you so much.
Hello. So one way it can help is if a park or like a landscape is designed for everyone instead of just like one select group of people, then it's more likely to be used because there's more groups that you're pulling from. And then if that park is more used, then it's more likely to be well funded and well maintained. So overall it benefits everyone to design for everyone.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Sabrina. Anybody else want to share? What did you write as a response to this question? Just share out what you wrote in response to this question. Any volunteers? Let's go to you, Alexis. Do you have a response for this question? Isabella, thank you for responding in the chat. Go ahead, Alexis.
Yeah. I don't have exact response for this question. I did number three, but in terms of systemic oppression or racism, I mean, for me, when I think of this question, I think of like how bus stops, there's like hostile architecture and how like, there's some particular bus stops where they just have like a lean kind of like little thing and it doesn't really help anybody. They're trying to remove the homeless, but it's also impacting the riders who are going on the bus. And so like, I think that's for me where it applies for this, just because like, everyone can use benches, and it's just not just, anyways, that was my thing for that one.
Thank you for sharing. So I like what you're saying. It's basically hostile architecture is hostile for everyone, not just the intended target, like people experiencing homelessness. Isabella, I see that you responded in the chat. Design implications are implementations such as hostile architecture, just like what Lexus shared, I believe is a good example of community spaces. Marginalizing certain people as a design is purposeful in its message towards homeless people. By understanding the stakeholders such as residents of the community, you can design parks and green spaces that can be spaces for everyone to enjoy by understanding the culture of the community. Definitely, definitely great, great, great examples, everyone. Thank you. Let's go to number two, community investment in landscape design. According to McGee, economic and social progress are hindered when certain communities are systemically excluded in landscape design. How could investments in historically marginalized neighborhoods impact overall well-being of a city or region. Consider both economic and social benefits in your response. Who has a response to number 2? Come off of mute or drop your response in the chat. Any volunteers? All right. Let's go to Caleb. Caleb, do you have a response to number 2?
Yeah. Basically, I just from the video when she started talking about like the drain pool metaphor, where communities will like start to close off like their shared benefits rather than like share them with the community. I basically said that like in landscape design that investing into like these neighborhoods, we could reverse this by I guess like just making these landscapes just able to have more people go to them. So like reducing like heat islands or like improving air quality or even like creating jobs in these parks, like kind of bring people to these parks, and therefore like from there people will be able to just get along better rather than just like closing off like their what they get personally rather than giving out to the community.
Thank you for sharing that, Caleb. Sounds like you're saying kind of do the reverse of that and just introduce these resources and infrastructure that are important for the shared collective, just like how historically that has been used to disenfranchise those communities that were trying to be more inclusive.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Caleb. We'll go to you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that. It was explained that excluding certain groups would weaken the entire economy, but when everyone participates, everyone gains. And investing in neglected neighborhoods through green spaces and public projects would create jobs, attract businesses, and improve the community overall. So investing would definitely strengthen community pride and contribute to a more balanced community.
Indeed, indeed. And a critical point of that, a lot of folks have issues with like gentrification, right? And so some of these efforts can be seen as gentrification. With that being said, there are ways that you could be intentional with ensuring that the infrastructure being built is inclusive of the existing community, right? Part of that is building a collaboration with the existing community to ensure that, the things that they want are a part of what's being built in the community that they reside in. And then also you can ensure that there are community benefits.
Why?
Right? Oftentimes there
Oh
are
my.
these agreements called community benefits agreements that are built into partnerships or contracts that you have with developers or businesses that, come into these different community-centered projects. And within those community benefits, you can talk about things like job opportunities, like affordable housing, right? You can ensure that those considerations are built into the intention of the site, so that folks that exist or currently reside in that community are not priced out or put in a position where they no longer can afford to live or take advantage of the new resources that are being developed. So that's also something to keep in mind. Great examples, everyone. Let's go to question number 3. Inclusive design and accessibility. This is a big point of what we just stated. McGee emphasizes addressing racism could benefit everyone by creating shared inclusive opportunities. What are some strategies you can implement as future landscape architects to make public spaces more inclusive and accessible? How can these strategies contribute to reducing social inequities? Any volunteers to respond to number 3? All right, Alexis, I see you responded in the chat. Creating demonstration gardens of different cultures that highlight cultural and historical plants used by specific communities, include artwork or statues of historical underrepresented communities. This allows repeated exposure to many people, and it normalizes and celebrates cultural differences. Powerful example, really, really great example. It makes me think of the Huntington. Has anyone been to the Huntington? I think Descanso Gardens is another one. But Huntington is an estate near Pasadena, and it has these beautiful, beautiful gardens from all different parts of the world. Some of them are like desert gardens. They have a Japanese garden. They have all these different terrains throughout the estate. And it's a beautiful experience to look at, and you get to learn about the different gardening and landscaping approaches of these different cultures. So that's what comes to mind when you stated that. And I think that that's a really great example. And it can be repeated at different scales, right? The state of the Huntington is pretty big. I believe I've never been to the Scansel Gardens, but the Scansel Gardens, from my understanding, is a similar type of setup. I recently went to, I think it's the South Coast Botanical Garden, which is a similar space. I went there for like a summer concert this summer, and they had an R&B concert. Oh, and it was so amazing. And it was in their garden, but you also had a chance to walk around to the different garden areas. They had the botanical garden, and they had different similar kind of setup like that. And it's a great conversation starter. It's, a great way to talk about these relationships between America and the different cultures and the different, colonial relationships, a lot of the wars that have happened, and how many of these cultures and communities have created homes and contributed so much to the culture that exists here in America, the United States of America. So great, great example, Alexis. Anybody else want to share in response to number three? Any volunteers before I pick on a person or two?
I can go.
Awesome, Edson.
I put to make spaces more inclusive and accessible. It calls for a need for co-creation with the residents for different cultural groups around the area, creating spaces that will establish the community needs and wants, reducing social constraints that might exist.
Indeed, that co-creation is critical. That's a big part of what we've been discussing this semester. By working in collaboration with impacted communities as leaders and collaborators, there's a sense of ownership, right? They feel like this isn't something that was made for them, but something that was made with them. And there's a sense of belonging that's created with that type of approach. So that co-creation piece is great, great, great. Thanks for uplifting that, Edson. Let's go to number 4. The last one, resilience in landscape architecture. McGee points out that systemic exclusion affects resilience across communities. How does equitable landscape architecture contribute to community resilience in the face of challenges like climate change or economic hardships? Can you think of examples where inclusive landscape design has built stronger, more unified communities? Who wants to respond to number 4? What did you write in response to number 4?
I
Any
can go.
volunteers? Awesome, Monica.
I was thinking like vegetable gardens
Mhm.
can be a solution for things like economic hardships, but they can also strengthen community. And then also things like stormwater capture and just like educating the community on like recycling water or like rain gardens and just like how to prepare for um like climate change and like less available resources.
It's a really, really great point. We're talking about resilience, right? Um, you talked about this idea of urban farming or gardening, right? And that's a big part of many of the local economies here in Los Angeles. I used to work for the Food Policy Council, and there is a lot of folks who are building job opportunities around this healthy food access economy. And that means urban farming. So many folks have dedicated their properties to growing produce. There's also cooperatives and efforts like Mudtown Farms, which I've talked to you all about this semester, working with different growers in South LA, giving them an opportunity to grow and sell produce. There are also organizations like Crop Swap LA, which work with homeowners who transform their properties into urban farms, tied to a monthly subscription service where families in South LA are able to access healthy food produce, right? So this is a sustainable way to, create, gardening as an economic opportunity for urban farmers. But your other point was big too in regards to building resilience. And that big component around sustainability is oftentimes missed as it pertains to like infrastructure to support it. So that's big. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to share on that? Just to add to that, right? Like this idea of, like you said, it helps build and unify communities, connecting folks to support in that way creates infrastructure, self-sustainable infrastructure. And you also mentioned this idea of climate resilience, which is really critical too, because we have situations where uh, cities are experiencing more flooding. And so if we can be proactive in situations where certain areas in our city through infrastructure build in partnership with government and private landowners to develop things like rain gardens or water capture resources that allow for the mitigation of flood, right? So controlling flood, but also being able to leverage some of that water for situations where we're not as water resilient because we experience things like droughts. So when we are leveraging rain gardens and water capture infrastructure, it helps for drought seasons. I don't even know how long our last drought was, but it was a very long time. And it was about a year where we didn't have any rain, in the reserves in Lake Mead were very low, and understanding how that impacted the infrastructure around water locally, because our water resources are tied to infrastructure that are so far away from us. Lake Mead is in the state of Nevada, comes from the Colorado River and makes its way down to California. Um, that infrastructure is at risk sometimes because of drought, right? And so, what does that mean when we're not leveraging a lot of the local infrastructure that we could be? Many of our water wells are polluted. So, we're not really able to use our local water wells, our local sources of water, because of the amount of pollutants that are found in them. So, we're again dependent on resources that are a lot further away from our local infrastructure. The Los Angeles River is not used for nature as much as it should be, let alone the use of potable water, right? So when we're talking about infrastructure like rain gardens or water captures support or infrastructure like that to support with climate resilience and support with these drought tolerance, which is again a part of the climate, is really critical. And I appreciate you for naming that. Let's see. Anybody else want to respond to number 4 before we move on? Let's see. Gary, do you want to jump in there real quick? Do you have a response to number 4? Let's see. Priscilla?
I said um, there are many examples of inclusive landscape designs that create local community engagement um, that require multiple participating groups. And one example I can think of is like community gardens um, that can be well, there are a lot of community gardens like in schools and like in public spaces. Um, like in school, kids can learn about uh, foods and recycling and composting, and then um, in local areas, like adults can also learn about those things too.
Yes, yes. So this opportunity to create resilience of these best practices through education and learning spaces. And so creating opportunities for folks to learn best practices around composting, and even farming. The Theodore Payne Foundation offers some really great certifications around landscaping for California native species, right? So these skill building opportunities that help you develop best practices that help ensure more climate resilient landscapes are not only being managed by folks who, let's say, go to school for it, but also homeowners who may need to learn these practices for their landscape that are up against these urban forest kind of uh, interfaces. And they need to learn how to manage a more drought, fire retardant landscape, right? So learning those practices through education opportunities is critical, and it definitely helps with resilience. Thanks for sharing that. So what I'm going to do now is in the lecture right there, but I want to go over some other components because next week we'll be out for, I want to say it's President's Day, if I'm not mistaken. So we won't have class next week, and so we'll be back on the 17th. I want to go over what some of those expectations are as far as your assignments that are due. So with that being said, for this week's lecture, you have your Botna and Wadna activity, which you completed last week. I need it to be submitted for this week's lecture. I'll be on the lookout for that. All of you should have completed the Identity Incentive Association exercise, and then submit your responses to the Heather McGee questions. What you'll be doing for homework this week is your narrative development. Your narrative development is in relationship to your studio projects, right? So what conflicts are identified? What stakeholders are identified? What do people of color or other species of flora and fauna, how are they experiencing these systems differently? And what are the values, ideologies, or policies that are supporting these experiences? So that's the question that you need to ask yourself in relation to your studio project. And this is really wrapping up our skill practice around the narrative canvas. The last step is to build our narrative, right? And so you'll be doing some skill practice around that. So make sure you submit your responses to your narrative development, along with your response to Heather McGee questions in your Botna Watna activity that you completed last week. Okay, so that's for this week's lecture. and it's right here on the module for this week, which should be available to you. So that is all due next week. In addition to the lecture for this week, I've also posted your final writing assignment. This is due December 5th, which is the Friday before the last week of classes. That last week, I will be finalizing all of my grades so that they can be submitted by the 14th. Wait, hold on. The 12th. So the final week of classes is the 12th, the week of the 12th. Hopefully you all will have all of your late assignments, anything past due, submitted by the 5th. Again, if you need any extra time with any assignments, you should be reaching out to me and letting me know so that we can come up with a reasonable agreement for the completion of that. But your final assignment for your writing assignment is due on the 5th. So what does your final writing assignment entail? So I want you to address each section of your written community engagement proposal. So your midterm has been a critical piece of preparing for your final, and a lot of your final would be just building on what you outlined in your midterm. Okay, so there are a few tasks that you have: stakeholder types and interests. Identify your key stakeholders and their interests in the project. List stakeholders such as residents, community-based organizations, local businesses, elected officials, etc. Define their interests and how they align with your project goals. Who are the most important stakeholders in your project, right? So these are some of the things you want to be thinking through. Objective, address how your project stimulates the local economy and supports equitable development. Identify economic opportunities and constraints with your project area. Incorporate features like partnerships with local vendors or connectivity to transit and retail networks. How will your project stimulate the local economy and which features align with these goals? Environmental considerations. Objective, evaluate the environmental factors influencing your project site. Identify challenges such as endangered species, geographical constraints, or pollution. Propose design solutions to address these considerations. What are the key environmental considerations that your project must address, and how do they influence your design? Policy report analysis. Utilize policies and reports to support your strategy. Research policies such as a sustainability plan and community-led reports. Integrate these resources into your community development strategy. What research informs your strategy and how does it shape your design and engagement approaches? And lastly, a big part of this is your community engagement principles. Apply your narrative strategy, collective impact, and social determinants of health frameworks to guide your engagement process. Develop a narrative-based strategy that identifies intervention opportunities, propose collaborative efforts with stakeholders to create systemic level change, address social determinants of health to improve the well-being of residents. How does the principles of narrative strategy, collective impact, and social determinants of health shape your engagement plan? Lastly, stakeholder engagement plan. Develop a clear, actionable plan for engaging stakeholders to achieve program goals. Task created action plan outlining strategies for identifying and managing key stakeholders. Who are your key stakeholders and what role do they play in your collective impact approach? Approaches to building and maintaining a strong base of support. What activities will you use? Data collection and analysis strategies to inform engagement and measurement outcomes. What do you need to know from each stakeholder group to inform your intervention? And then methods to incorporate stakeholder input into your program design and enhancements. How will you decide what to incorporate? Alignment of stakeholder priorities with policy advocacy efforts. How will you manage transparency with your site constraints and impact on the scope of work? Note, use specific examples to illustrate alignment with community needs. So this flowchart diagram is where you can be creative, right? This is the second part of your project. So everything that was just discussed is insight for the written section of your assignment. Your flow chart, again, is your creative part. The objective is to create visual key engagement points in your project. This should be comprehensive for public consumption. Design a flow chart like design that illustrates how stakeholder engagement methods and design interventions interact through your program lifecycle. That could be similar to like a site program. Um, when we talked about that earlier this semester. The deliverables written proposal. So this is again is just a concise breakdown on what I'm looking for. Your written proposal should be 15 to 2,000 words. It should address each section with specificity, integrating your theoretical concepts and practical solutions. 12-point font, Chicago style citations with footnotes. So instead of a bibliography where you put all your citations at the end, you would put a footnote in text, and then at the bottom of the page, it should have your citations for the footnotes. So you can reference the Chicago style format reference for more instruction on that. Single spaced, incorporate class readings and research assignments. We've been reading a lot in this class, the class assigned book, and then as well as many case studies. So you want to reference those. You can also include others, but I am going to be looking for citations of the class assigned readings to see what you're taking away from them and how you're like incorporating them as citations into your written proposal. And again, the flow chart, it should be a visual representation of key engagement milestones, include timeline for engagement with at least 2 stakeholder groups impacted by your group. Get creative in diagramming different site elements. It could be some type of collage. It should be comprehensive as it is going to be community facing, but you can get very creative. So I'll be evaluating you all on clarity and depth, research integrity, integration, stakeholder engagement, creativity, and feasibility. And that's it, right? It's going to be a written portion of what I would say you prepared in your midterm. I will post these instructions, yes. As far as an example of the flow chart, let me show you an example. Let's see, what can I show you as an example? Boom. Okay. Okay, let's see. So I'm going to share screen of so this is a good example here. It's the written proposal portion. So as you can see, they were able to incorporate some visuals to support some of the written concepts that they were presenting or sharing, right? And then this is their visual key milestones. So these are some of the ways that students got creative with their writing assignments and presenting the visuals for community. So this is flow chart here. So it's giving a breakdown of what are the key components of the project, right? So some of them create like engagement visuals, some of them created concept visuals, but it was all public facing, right? So this is the flow chart of all their engagement. So these are a few examples of how, again, students reflected the deliverable of their written assignment and then the flow chart of the project, um, programs, concept, engagement that was intended. Is that helpful? Thumbs up if that was helpful. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So again, it does give you some opportunity to be creative, but you definitely want to have a strong written proposal for, again, all the things that you learned in this class. And again, leverage your midterm. Your midterm literally is like an alley-oop to a strong written proposal for your final. So definitely leverage that. Okay. Let's go to back to modules. Yeah, here. Okay. So boom. So that's your final. Boom. So we're coming to an end. I can't believe it. There's only like 3 more weeks of class left. And some of those will not be spent together like next week, right? With that being said, I do want to share that next week's assignment is going to be your last reading assignment. You have your last reading assignment on techniques to stimulate community engagement. That will be made available on Canvas next week on the 10th. It is due to unlock on the 10th. Let me see. Share my screen. So boom. Techniques to stimulate community engagement. It's a really great reading. It may be another reading that you can consider as far as your research and citations for your final. So again, this is your last reading assignment for the semester. And I have an extra credit opportunity that will be available next week as well. And this is for folks who, for whatever reason, feel like, they're a little behind or they didn't come to a few classes, so they didn't get to turn in their lecture assignments, so they missed a few of them and they really are trying to push to that A, or, they struggled, but they really want to pass or get to that, extra notch or gap that they're missing towards the grade that they want to be at. So this right here is an extra credit, and it's an opportunity for you to present your midterm project. Some of you will have some feedback from me that I'm working on right now. My goal is to finish your midterm reviews by Wednesday, just so that you can have this opportunity to participate in the extra credit if you are interested. So again, this will be available starting next week for signups. And so what you can do to sign up is submit your midterm for this extra credit assignment submission, and I will take that as you will want to sign up to present your midterm. We will have 2 opportunities to present. Um, we will be out of class next week because of President's Day or something, one of those days. And then 17th, we will be in class. So that'll be one opportunity for you to present. And then the week of Thanksgiving, we will not have class in observation of Thanksgiving. And then December 1st, you'll have another opportunity to present. So those will be the 2 opportunity days to present. That will push us through the end of this semester. The extra credit for that is 75 points, and it's an opportunity for you to share your midterm projects with your classmates so that they can hear all about the great things that you're hoping to have on your site intervention and what you are kind of previewing for your final project community engagement proposals. So, Alexis,
Good question, Professor. How do we sign up for the extra credit? Again, one more time.
you want to submit your midterm again to this um Canvas module submission. It's on week 12.
Got it. Okay.
So you submit and that's like you're signing up to do the extra credit. So that will begin next week. You'll have the opportunity to sign up for extra credit. If you are interested, do so, and you'll get to present your midterm projects. And they should incorporate any feedback, right? So if I'm giving you feedback for your midterm, you should be incorporating that, and I should see that reflected when you present your extra credit. The last thing I would say is with your midterm assignment, I am asking you to turn into at least 2 things, right? So you have your presentation deck, which many of you incorporated the deliverables into your presentation, which is totally fine. But there is for the midterm study packet, there was the midterm exam. This document, I did want to have this document. So you can, I need this document. So in addition to your presentation deck, I should also have this document, which pretty much lets me know and this is probably helpful to some of your presentations because you didn't really reference, for example, the research that you did, right? So like for the policy documents that you're referencing, I wanted to see some of that. I wanted to see the documents you were referencing, the citations that you were using, the links associated with that. And this document I feel should reflect that if it's not in your presentation already. So that's one thing that I noticed many of you did not do is turn in this along with your presentation deck. So I do need this document. Yeah, we are wrapping up the semester. I can't believe it's like closing in on us so fast. The next few weeks, we'll be listening to whoever signs up for their midterms. And then we also have the evaluations coming up. There is an evaluation that, the university requires, and then I also have an evaluation that I send out. And so that probably will go out week 13 or week 14. So be on the lookout for that. And I believe I saw a notification about the campus evaluation. So definitely complete the evaluations. They're really important for professors so that we can improve and make sure that, your learning outcomes are more comprehensive and achieve great success in your future endeavors. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end the lecture for the night. And I'll stay behind for anyone that has any questions regarding tonight's lecture or the final assignment.